The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been working on an initiative called Engineering with Nature. It all started in 2010. And this is the EWN Podcast. EWN is developing and implementing nature-based solutions for water and infrastructure projects. It's bringing together a growing international community of scientists, engineers, and researchers from all kinds of disciplines that are committed to harnessing the power of nature to solve problems. The EWN Podcast tells their stories. Now here's your host, Sarah Thorne of Decision Partners.
So I'm reading that oceans hold the keys to an equitable and sustainable planet, and I have to say, I'm pretty intrigued. Then I see the call to action to join the revolution to unlock innovative ocean science solutions. Now I'm thinking this is clearly a challenge and an opportunity to explore on the Engineering with Nature podcast. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 3. My Engineering with Nature co-host today is Amanda Tritinger. Amanda is Research Hydraulic Engineer in the Coastal and Hydraulics Laboratory at the Engineering Research Development Center of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And Amanda's recently been named Deputy Program Manager of the Engineering with Nature program. As we learned when we talked to Amanda in Season 4, Episode 1, she's absolutely passionate about coastal resilience and the important role oceans play in climate change. So welcome back, Amanda.
Hey, I am so excited to be here, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation today. Thank you for having me. I am, 100% excited about coastal resilience, and we could not get to coastal resilience if we didn't care about our oceans. So I'm really excited to hear more about what our guest has to say on oceans and learn more with you.
Perfect. So Amanda and I were recently talking about the importance of oceans, and she was the one that suggested our special guest. Well, let me just say what really happened was she said she had just been at this conference. She met this fabulous woman, and we had to get her on the podcast right away.
Yes. So I was lucky enough to be down at the State of the Coast, which is a summit in Louisiana, and Courtney McGeachy and I, we were put on the same panel twice at this week-long summit, and you know what? I didn't get enough. I wanted to hang out more, so I'm using this as the excuse to hang out with Courtney and get to know her a little bit better. So thank you, EWN Podcast, for that excuse. All right, so Courtney is a really awesome woman. We actually met at the Coastal Summit's Women's Coastal Leadership Breakfast panel, so we'll definitely be talking more about her background. We also were on a panel talking about natural-based solutions, or NBS, together later in the week, and she also has some really great visions and information on NBS too. So before I get to everything she's going to talk about, let me talk about Courtney. Courtney is Director of Ocean Visions, which is a UN Decade Collaborative Center for Ocean Climate Solutions. And prior to joining Ocean Visions, she directed the GOLD program, or Planet Gold, at the Conservation International, and served as the principal of the Pew Marine Fellows Program at the Pew Charitable Trusts. She is a fabulous guest. In a world where we are driven by innovation and fueled by ambition, Courtney encapsulates, both with her current job and her past, that vision for a beautiful, more resilient future. And her work with Oceans Visions as the director, as one of many of the directors of the UN Decade Collaborative Center for the Ocean Climate Solutions, she has an interesting take on what we can do as a nation, as a world, to team up with our ocean and build a strong tomorrow. So welcome, Courtney. We could not be more glad to have you. Come on in. Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much. I'm glad people are listening to this and not watching. I think I almost teared up a little bit with that introduction. But no, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Courtney, we're just delighted to have you on the podcast, and it seems like our timing's really perfect. As we were preparing for this episode, the United Nations adopted a marine biology treaty for the high seas, And I understand it's the first international agreement of its kind.
Yeah, the timing is perfect. It's a really exciting time for people that work in the field. I have colleagues that have been working on this treaty for over 2 decades. And so it's a really immersive time to be involved. And so, as you already heard Secretary General, the Assistant Secretary General for the UN say, this really pumps new life into the ocean. But also, I would like to amend that statement and say that it pumps new life into the community. There are people that have dedicated their entire careers to making this happen, and it's really exciting. And I would just add really quickly that this particular treaty is exciting because we have some, rules and regulations for coastal communities that go up to the EEZs or exclusive economic zones. But this is the first of its kind that will protect the ocean beyond that. And so we're all really excited.
I have not heard the term EEZs before. That seems like a term I want to know more about. Courtney, could you just elaborate a little bit more on what the EEZ is and how important, what I'm guessing, how important this could be to our community's futures?
Absolutely. So an EEZ or exclusive economic zone is essentially the part of the ocean that a country owns up into a certain point. And so, for example, this really comes into play with fisheries. So fisheries that live within a certain exclusive economic zone, a country has rights, if you will, to that ecosystem or those resources, rather, the resources within their economic zone. But beyond that, there really is no ownership, if you will. And so no ownership generally equates to no protections, right? So countries protect their EEZs with, their local government, their local military, perhaps even. However, beyond the EEZs, on the high seas, as we would say, there is no protection because there's no ownership, really. And so that's why this new treaty is important.
Wow, that is fascinating. Of course, that's important. Ownership of an ocean is even kind of fascinating. So, what a brilliant way to protect the unowned.
It helps put it into perspective, I think, for all of us that now this treaty is looking after the health and well-being of the whole ocean system, not just close to shore, right? It's a really big deal. The high seas, as you call it.
Absolutely.
Courtney, before we talk about why oceans play such a critical role in addressing climate change, we want to talk a little bit about your journey. Amanda talked a little bit about your background. Tell us how you came to be a director at Ocean Visions.
Yeah, so I've had an interesting past. I think we could probably do an entire episode just about that. So I'll try to be brief. But so I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, pretty far from the ocean. We had some rivers, but all rivers lead to the ocean, right? But yeah, I was sort of always, just from a young age, very interested in nature. In Ohio, we have creeks and quarries and that sort of thing. And so I was always that kid sort of playing in the water. But, I had a couple of different paths. I don't even know if Amanda knows this, but I actually did a pre-medical program at Ohio State at one point. And then I thought I wanted to be an engineer. So I was actually enrolled for a biomedical engineering degree at a school in North Carolina. But ultimately, I had to follow my heart, and I knew that I wanted to pursue marine science. And so I actually turned down two full offers from universities to pursue my passion. And my lovely mother was supportive of that. And so I went to Hampton University and joined their marine science program. It's an awesome program. They have some really great affiliations with NOAA, which I think we'll touch on a little bit later. So after I did my undergrad at Hampton, I went on to pursue my master's in fish behavior, actually, at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. And I sort of always knew that I wanted to sort of start my official professional career in environmental policy. And so for me, DC was the only option. It needed to start there if I was going to make a difference. And so I moved to DC, started my career at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And that was a great opportunity to get a lot of domestic experience. I got to work with some great representatives during my time there. One of my favorites being Representative Kilmer in the great state of Washington, and worked with a lot of Indigenous and First Nations communities in that position as well. But I sort of got the international itch. And so I left domestic work and joined Pew Charitable Trust to really start to make an impact internationally, because the ocean doesn't just touch our borders, right? And so I spent some time there and then decided, you know what, I want to be a little bit more well rounded as an environmentalist, right? I had a ton of experience in the ocean space. And so there was an opportunity at Conservation International in partnership with the Global Environment Facility to take on a director position working on reducing the negative impacts of artisanal and small scale gold mining. And so that was more of a terrestrial work. And so I did that for about 2 years, and ultimately the ocean kept calling, as I think it calls to everyone. And so I came back to the ocean and accepted this position to direct the Ocean Vision's UN Decade Collaborative Center for Ocean Climate Solutions. And here I am.
Okay, see, I told you, don't you need to learn more? Yes, that's definitely put a little bookmark there, introduce Courtney again later to learn more, because yes, I thought I had heard a lot and there's still more. Beyond all of these remarkable achievements, beyond this beautiful background, which, side note, at the women's leadership panel, we did talk a lot about changing the course of your personal river, and as you learn more information, you get inspired by something new, follow a different tributary of life. It's okay to adjust and take on something different. And wow, Courtney, I didn't realize how much you were embodying that. So very cool to learn. But yes, beyond all of these remarkable achievements, both personally and now in the corporate realm, I find Courtney to be a beacon of inspiration and passion, advocating for not just, these environmental things, but philanthropic causes and empowering individuals from all walks of life. You are constantly striving for this sense of purpose and encouraging others along the way to unleash their true potential and make their mark on the world. And I've really caught on to that right away from the few conversations that we've had. One thing that we did talk about was how to spark that in others. You see that light clearly shining here with Courtney, but what inspires you about your current work? What do you think could get others excited about what you're doing? Maybe people that are your students, younger, looking to take their next tributary path. What inspires you currently with what you're doing?
Yeah, I think what inspires me most about what I'm doing is that it's an opportunity to really create a new community of ocean solutionists. I think all eyes are on us right now. I think a lot of people are starting to become aware that the ocean plays a very large part for the fight against climate change. And so that's given us ocean solutionists a new platform and a new audience. And so that's really exciting. And the young people are getting really, really amped up and excited and energized. And so the UN Decade Collaborative Center that I direct is actually a partnership with Georgia Tech, Georgia Aquarium, and Ocean Visions. And so leveraging the thousands of guests the Georgia Aquarium gets a day, I think 3 million a year, something like that. It's really exciting to see everyone from, 9-year-olds to 90-year-olds come into the aquarium and look for opportunities to be educated or informed about what's happening in the ocean solution space. It's really becoming a great launch pad, if you will. And so that's what I'm the most excited about, for sure.
We're feeling your passion and your excitement, Courtney. I think this is a really good segue for you to talk about Ocean Visions, talk about what the organization's really all about, and talk about your role, because I think it's critical that people understand just this tremendous focus on oceans and the future and the important role you're playing in that.
Absolutely. So Ocean Visions, we like to call it a startup nonprofit. So we are, just getting our sea legs, but we've already made such a great impact. And so one of the missions that Ocean Visions has is to really focus on innovations and solutions for the fight against climate change. And so we really operate exclusively at the Ocean Climate Nexus. And while we absolutely recognize that observation and monitoring and modeling and research collaboration are all extremely important pieces of the puzzle, we focus very heavily on implementing and catalyzing innovations and solutions, right? So moving the technology forward, moving the nature-based solutions forward. We think it's time to act, right? We have an urgency. We want to be thoughtful and respectful about how swiftly we moved, but we are really focused at moving solutions and innovations into action. I think the sort of the best way to describe it at Ocean Visions, we have what we refer to as the 4 R's. And so that is reduce, remove, repair, and reach. And so I can talk a little bit more about each of those, but my work fits really well into the reach pillar. And so what I do as the director of the UN Decade Collaborative Center is I really focus on bringing international visibility to these innovations and solutions, sharing those with the world, not just within the UN Decade framework, but even beyond, but also really focusing on capacity building opportunities, continuing education opportunities, professional development for the new generation of ocean climate solutionists that are coming. That's something that we're really passionate about. And then in addition to that, because this is a UN endorsed activity, we also have UN Ocean Decade support to support the 2030 goals.
I'd love to hear more about what even Ocean Decade is.
Yes. So the Ocean Decade was essentially started in 2021. So it'll go 2021 to 2030. And it's essentially designed to get from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. So there are 10 decade challenges. I won't embarrass myself by naming all 10 of them by heart, but my Decade Collaborative Center focuses on Decade Challenge 5, which focuses on climate. A few others that I do know off the top of my head focus on ocean literacy, pollution, blue food, which is also a really important part of the climate puzzle, but observation data as well. And so the idea is that the Ocean Decade is essentially bringing together multiple efforts. Currently, I believe there are around 375 decade actions. So that could be projects or programs under the Ocean Decade umbrella. And the idea is that we are leveraging this framework to really make a difference before we get to 2030. As many of your listeners and you as well probably know, within the ocean community and even environment community, dare I say, we're all looking towards 2030, whether it's the UN Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's keeping, the environment from reaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius tipping point by 2030. We're all looking towards 2030, but I would advocate that we have to do the work now. We shouldn't be waiting until 2030 comes to make a difference. It's definitely time to act now.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that imperative. I mean, in previous podcasts we've done, we did one called Measuring What Matters and the implementation of nature and natural and nature-based solutions. And everybody was talking about we've got 10 years to really make a difference. From your perspective, Courtney, why this imperative? Why 10 years?
Ultimately, I would like it to be shorter, but that's a personal goal. I'm like, yeah, we need to get this done by next week. But being a scientist, I know that that is not exactly how it works. And so I think 10 years is a great number to where you start to be able to convene, catalyze, implement, and monitor and report, right? Those are all, in my mind, sort of the pieces that you need to hit. And so 10 years really gives you the opportunity to sort of build the community first, start to gather the ideas across the larger community, put those pieces, start to convene, right? Because we want everyone to have a seat at this table. If we're not doing this in an equitable way, then we shouldn't be doing it at all. So that gives you an opportunity to make sure that you're being thoughtful about engaging everyone. And then implementation itself takes several years. And even though I also want to clarify that even once we get to 2030 and it may be the sunsetting stamp for some of these initiatives, these are really meant to live on. These are supposed to be sustainable. So we're hoping that the actions that we take now will live on past the 2030 deadline.
I was really intrigued by the outcomes, the 7 ocean decade outcomes. I thought that they really resonated. Can you just talk about those, share them with our listeners, and then talk about why those 7? Why were those the important ones to focus on?
Yeah, so the 7 ocean outcomes were essentially designed by the UN Ocean Decade Governing Body, which essentially the seven ocean decade outcomes. Excuse me, want to make sure I get all these right. A clean ocean, a healthy and resilient ocean, a productive ocean, a predicted ocean, a safe ocean, an accessible ocean, an inspiring and engaging ocean. And I think these were all important because they touch on not only everything that we need for from a scientific lens, but also what we need from a personal and community lens, right? Like, for example, one way that I think about it is there's no point in making the ocean safe and healthy if it's not accessible to all of us.
Right.
So,
Right.
and also, we're not going to get the energy that we need to help the ocean if we're not making sure that we're inspiring and engaging. And so, I think all 7 of these are really interconnected and all equally important in making sure that we are getting to the ocean, that we want in the future.
I love them. I thought that it was so interesting the way they were framed. They're all values based. They're
Yeah.
all values that people around the world share. And I hope that you're seeing a lot of support for these because they're all really important. And to your point, they're all interrelated. You can't really take them apart. Coming back to the science focus, I'm really curious about the gaps in ocean sciences.
Yeah.
What do we need to do now to make progress on these goals? What are the science opportunities?
Yeah, we need money, honey. I mean, that's a big like that's the gap for me. I don't think that was the question, but I'll say that anyway. But but yes. So I would say, and so the reason I say that it is related to the science gaps question. So one gap that we see in my sector, and so I'll focus just to frame this a little bit on sort of the, ocean climate nexus. When we're looking at different innovations and technologies to focus on essentially leveraging the power of the ocean to fight climate change, a lot of these innovations and solutions are expensive. And so one of the gaps that we have is actually field testing and deploying these innovations at scale. A lot of field tests can run you, depending on the solution, can run you, between $500 million to $1 billion for maybe a couple of trials, right? At scale. And so that is one of the issues, funding. But in addition to that, when it comes to field testing at scale, permits are a big issue.
Oh, yeah.
I think Amanda has way more experience than me on that, so she may want to talk about that. But that's another challenge that we see from the innovation space. Getting the permitting to actually test a lot of these in the environment at scale is very challenging. And so we need our federal partners to really step up and help us get through some of that red tape. But Amanda, I'm sure, has a lot to say about that.
Ooh, I would shake my head real big no. I have nothing to say on permitting, but we'll leave that to the awesome USACE practitioners in the EWN program. And we need you to be doing that permitting at such a large scale really does show what the workflow is for that kind of research and that work. Like scaling up, we talk about that all of the time. We need to learn more on how to do that and show. The more show by examples we have, the more standard of practice natural-based solutions, this state-of-the-art science will be. And
Absolutely.
yeah, we just need more science, more of the time, more money, honey. We big stamp of approval on that because we are doing our best everywhere. The people that are behind things like natural-based solutions, they are passionate, typically very passionate, and will do what it takes. But the more often we can share what the framework on what that doing is, the better. So we really appreciate that because we want to implement and we want to bring the state of the art to the state of the practice.
Absolutely. And when I think about all this work, I mean, the other major piece of it is the money, the permitting, but it's also the engagement, stakeholder engagement, community engagement, all of that. And I know that you do a huge amount of that kind of work, Courtney. You talk about all of these projects, the need, the opportunity, the projects, when you're in places like Capitol Hill, talking with policymakers during Ocean Week, for example. And it's also something you talked to students about. Talk a little bit about how you get that message across about the critical need oceans play and how people can get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the way you framed that because the way that I communicate people really does change depending on the audience, right? So the conversations I have with policymakers aren't necessarily the same conversations that I have with students. And so coming freshly off of Capitol Hill Ocean Week, we're closing Ocean Month. And Capitol Hill Ocean Week was, lined up really well with International World Ocean Day. And so having the opportunity to talk with policymakers there, one thing really stood out to me, Sarah, and that's that policymakers, I believe it was actually Chair Mallory, Brenda Mallory, she's the chair of the White House Environmental Council, said, I really envy you all because I get to focus on this issue 1 month of the year. That's in June, right? And the reality of the situation is she's such a busy woman, she probably doesn't even focus on it the entire month. But at least they can bring it up that 1 month a year, where the rest of us, we work on this 24/7, right? And it really resonated with me because that's the reality of the situation. A lot of decision makers and policymakers, they can't spend as much time as we would like them to on these initiatives. So then it relies on us to make sure that we're giving them information in a digestible way where they can comprehend the information, digest it, use it with their stakeholders so that decisions can be made. I'm a scientist by, academic profession, all of that. But, we have to sort of move away from using engagement tools of just giving policymakers literature reviews or 100 pages to read because it's just not going to happen. And so we have to be more thoughtful about the products that we're using to communicate when it comes to policymakers, just because they don't have as much time as we probably would like them to. And then when it comes to students, I think the conversation changes to more of an inspiring lens in the sense that most of the students that I work with, what resonates with them the most is sharing my failures. Right? The policymakers want to hear all my wins. If I'm failing, they're like, okay, you can leave. But the students, they want to hear all my failures. They eat it up. They love it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because, one, it makes you relatable. Only you can see this, but I'm a Black woman. And so representation matters. There weren't a lot of people that looked like me in a lot of the rooms that I was in 10 years ago, and not necessarily in a lot of the rooms I'm in today, to be honest. And so I definitely think it's important to have, representation in the space, but I also think it's important to make sure that you're sharing that, as Amanda already alluded to earlier, you can change your mind. Your river can change course. It's okay to make different decisions. And I also mentioned this in the women's leadership brunch, as Amanda may remember. It's important to make sure that you don't put yourself in a box and make sure that other people don't put you in a box as well. I think as a marine biologist or even as an engineer, people think that your scope of work or field can be so limited, but it doesn't have to be. There are a lot of different connections you can make. There's a lot of different avenues you can take. For example, me being a scientist by background, I sort of learned very early on that my natural or instinctual gifts were being more of a people person, being more of a communicator, being what I like to call like a social innovation connector. That was my natural gift. And so I learned really early on that, my gifts probably fit more in a program management space than being out in the field in waiters, as much as I love to do that from time to time. I'm sure Amanda can relate. But yeah, so I think I would say in summary, just to wrap some of that up, when I'm talking to policymakers, I'm usually sharing the wins, and when I'm talking to students, I'm sharing the failures. It's the best way I can sum it up.
I love every part of that, and I do remember you saying that, Courtney. I vibed with that.
Well, this is really what we're talking about is really the process of innovation, the scientific process, the process of discovery. You're talking about it on a personal scale, but you're also talking about it on the whole ocean scale. So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about innovation and tell us a little bit about where nature-based solutions fit into, the next 10 years, the 10-year decade?
Absolutely. So in the innovation space that I focus on, we focus a lot on carbon dioxide removal and specifically on marine or ocean-based carbon dioxide removal. And so generally a lot of the innovations that I work on are different innovations and technologies. Well, let me back up a little bit. I myself am not doing this amazing work alone. We work with some great entrepreneurs, startups, accelerators that have very bright individuals that work on this. And so, but a lot of these innovators, they have different technologies that focus on essentially removing carbon dioxide from the ocean. And therefore, because of the equilibrium between the air and the ocean, that naturally draws down carbon dioxide from the ocean, from the atmosphere into the ocean, right? So I think Jane Lubchenco said it best. We're sort of trying to change the narrative from the ocean being a victim to the ocean being a solution to help us fight climate change. And so there are many different avenues you could take. Some of the different technologies focus on changing the ocean's natural solubility pump. So there could be some different, Sarah, you and I sort of touched on in a separate conversation, some innovations that look at working on alkalinity enhancement projects. We have some that look at sort of increasing the ocean's natural solubility pump. But when it comes to nature-based solutions, there are a lot of different opportunities, whether it's creating mangrove restoration projects that will help sort of remove carbon. One thing we do know is that nature-based organisms or ocean-based, organisms such as mangroves, tidal marshes, seagrasses can store up to 5 times more carbon per hectare than a terrestrial forest. And so we want to make sure that we are creating these different opportunities to leverage these nature-based solutions such as salt marshes, seagrasses, mangroves to help fight climate change. But the issue is that I think nature-based solutions, they kind of get tangled up in a media argument, if you will. And we have a lot of naysayers saying that, oh, nature-based solutions are not going to save us. Well, if you take a step back, no one is saying that nature-based solutions are going to save us. What we're saying is they have the potential to be a key part of the portfolio of solutions. We know that we've gotten to a point, unfortunately, in our climate where we need a suite of options to get us to where we need to be. And nature-based solutions are a big piece of that pie. And so one thing that I like to remind people is that, nature-based solutions for climate may not have a large impact in the way that maybe renewable wind energy does. However, nature-based solutions has a lot of co-benefits. socio and economic. So we're talking about alternative livelihoods. You could be a fisherman in one of the Gulf states, and maybe your fish stocks have moved out to the high seas, which we talked about earlier, right? They've moved
Hmm.
out because the high seas are getting warmer, right? And so now they're going a little further out, and you can't fish as close to shore as you used to. And so now you need an alternative livelihood. And so now maybe instead of, fishing for, red snapper or whatever the case may be, now you're an oyster fisherman, or now you harvest kelp or seaweeds. And so that's another benefit. Um, and another benefit, of course, especially in the Gulf states, is erosion. Erosion is a really big problem. Land is being lost every day, and these nature based solutions, in addition to helping remove carbon dioxide, they're also providing surge protection from terrible storms. We know that storms are getting more intense. But yeah, there are a lot of different co-benefits. I could go on and on and on about this forever. But yes, nature-based solutions are a big piece of the puzzle. And so I hope we can help people to understand that.
I just made a really cool connection between your statement of not putting a person in a box and saying that person can only do one thing, and then taking something like coral, mangroves, nature-based solutions, and saying they can only be one thing.
Yes.
Coastal protection can be more than one thing. One thing can be two things.
Yes.
I think I also, we bonded about this during the women's talk, found that humans like to categorize, whether it's people, whether it's natural infrastructure. They say, Courtney is marine biologist, put her in the field. I think it's really inspiring the way that you learned not only how to use your voice, but where to use it. And then that's the message, right? It's not just what you're saying, but who you're lining up to say it. More recently, I've been listening to Rachel Carlson's The Sea Around Us. It's a great read, but very easy to listen to as well. Spoiler alert, the ocean is very important. And she has full chapters on plankton and how they are the key to the ocean's success. And I would have overlooked plankton. So
Yes.
I just find it fascinating, these things that we're like, oh, plankton's over there doing that, like feeding the whales,
Right.
not saving the ocean.
She's absolutely right. It all starts with plankton, which, yeah, that's episode 3. Sarah, I hope you're writing this down.
I got it for the show notes. Exactly.
But so through the Engineering with Nature, through the podcast, through these strategic engagements, I learned more and more just about how much nature-based solutions do play quite a bit of a role in carbon. There's a lot of, like you said, mangroves per hectare. Storing all of this carbon sequestration capacity is really fascinating, and there's a lot of alignment with what you're doing, with what USACE is now putting a lot of research into quantifying that carbon storage capacity and those co-benefits. But we're doing it over here, and it's just so inspiring to hear how Ocean Decade and the UN is expanding that state of understanding.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up this episode, I think everything that you've talked about is so important, Courtney. I want to ask you both a question. Clearly, oceans have to be part of the solution to climate change, and people need to understand and be involved in the role that oceans can play. They need to be involved in making it happen. So I'm going to ask you both, and I'm going to start with you, Courtney.
Okay.
What's your call to action for policymakers and decision makers?
My call to action for policy and decision makers is to give innovations and solutions a fighting chance. And by that, I mean most innovations and solutions, I think we get stuck around having the risk conversation. Like, what are the risks? What are the negative side effects? And with every solution, there are risks and side effects. And so the way I sort of think of it is, think of the ocean as someone you love dearly, and they're terminally ill, but the doctor comes to you and says, hey, I have a solution that could save their life. There could be some risks, probably some side effects. Do you want to consider it? And I think most people would be a resounding yes. Let's consider it. And so I encourage policymakers to think of the ocean and climate crisis as a public health crisis because they're quite similar. And I would also encourage policymakers to find the resources. I know I hammered on this a little bit earlier, but we tend to find resources for many other things. And so I would encourage us to be thoughtful about finding the resources for this, right? We have to put our money where our mouth is, especially, domestically, we are a nation that uses a lot of greenhouse gases, a lot of fossil fuels, right? Compared to some other nations. And so we need to be contributing. And so I would encourage domestically our governments and policymakers to really step up to the plate financially as well.
I think it's really interesting that you put it into the public health perspective because we have our very recent global example of what happens when we all put our energy, our money, and our brains together to address, COVID-19.
Absolutely.
What if we all did that around the climate imperative? That's inspiring. Thanks,
Yeah.
Courtney. Amanda, how about you? What's your call to action for policymakers and decision makers?
My call to action will be to consider don't put solutions into a box. Consider this or that, and why not both? I think that's a huge takeaway from this conversation is that there's co-benefits. Courtney mentioned there's a toolbox. These are a suite of tools we have, and there's no reason we can't combine them. Have some redundancy in our resilient solutions that work together and can, while they protect our communities, protect our citizens, also help protect our ocean, which is our incredible resource that we might be and are taking for granted right now.
Absolutely.
Holistic approaches. Imagine the potential if we really opened the toolbox and looked at the synergistic opportunities, right? Okay, the last question, I'm going to start with Amanda. What's your call to action for students and practitioners who are early in their careers?
Well, hopefully this is a clear one. Don't put yourself in a box, right? Consider what's new. As you take in more information, this world has so much to give. Do not fear changing your path. Be inspired by Courtney here, who has accomplished the amazing, has this unparalleled passion for change. Be prepared to do the same. Be unwavering in your enthusiasm to learn more and take on the unknown. And be okay with failing. Failing is how you get better. And also be ready to, the things that you are enthusiastic about, the people around you might not be. So be proud of how you are different. That's how you make change.
And that's how you innovate, right?
That's how you innovate.
I love that. That's inspiring. And I have to tell you, ladies, I just finished a book called The 100-Year Life, which you all should read. And it talks about the fact that there is no one path. You have to, there's multiple paths. There's, in your parlance, rivers. You have to follow, if you're going to live 100 years, you have to learn different things, be exposed to different things, try different things, fail at a few things. There's no one kind of straight line path. It's a myth.
Embrace the conflux of your life river.
Yes.
I love it.
Exactly.
And Courtney, how about you?
Yeah.
How about you? You talk to a lot of students. What do you say to students?
Yeah, I think I sort of say a suite of things, and I'll be brief. But one is consider a career of service. It's so rewarding. I think, the students that are graduating now, they're coming out of a time where they're bogged down with student loans and they may want to just, take the first gig that's offering the most amount of money, but I think it can be so fulfilling to consider a career of service. And so if you're very passionate about something, consider pursuing that. Another thing that I generally say to students is embrace your natural instincts, embrace your natural gifts. Some of the gifts you didn't learn at your 4-year degree program, or if you pursued a PhD even, but those natural gifts that you have are valuable. And you maybe didn't pay a university for them, but they are useful and someone could use them.
Yeah, I think they called those soft skills when I was in college, and I'm finding them to be, nature, the reason it's so resilient is it can bend and not break.
Yeah,
soft skills. I love that.
Yes, absolutely.
That's perfect. Well, as we wrap up this episode, I have to say, Amanda, I think you were right. Courtney is absolutely an amazing woman, and she has just been a terrific and inspiring guest. I have learned so much, and I hope that our listeners have learned a lot as well. Courtney, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, for sharing your obviously very deep passion for the oceans, and for really inspiring our leaders to get out of the box, get engaged, think about the importance of oceans, and do whatever they can do to contribute to making our oceans healthy and resilient for now, for generations now, but also for future generations. We want everybody to be able to enjoy the benefits that oceans bring us. So thank you, Courtney.
No problem. I am definitely happy to be here with all of you. And yeah, we love the oceans. And, we get every other breath we take from the ocean. Don't forget that. So
I'll think of you every breath I take. Thanks for being here.
Amanda, you could have just invited me to dinner.
Oh, no, this is the best. And Amanda, thank you for doing this episode. It's just been great co-hosting with you again, and let's do it again.
Deal.
And to all of you, thank you so much for listening. If you have any comments about this episode or anything we're working on in the Engineering with Nature program, please give us a call or drop us a note. Our details are on the Engineering with Nature website. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we sure hope you'll join us again when we talk about engineering with nature.
You've been listening to the EWN podcast, developed by Sarah Thorne and Jeff King, National Lead, Engineering with Nature Initiative, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, for more information, you can visit our website, engineeringwithnature.org. The EWN podcast is produced by Eye Contact Productions for the Engineering with Nature program within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm Dave Trafford.